Well, thank you, Jay, for that introduction. For me, being at TiE is like being with friends and family. So many of you I know personally. In fact, the first time I spoke at TiEcon was in 1994. It's a very long time ago. So I've been on the stage at TiE quite a few times. Just to tell you my story, I have been back in India for the last 15 months. When I finished up with the Obama administration, my friends at KPMG, the chairman of KPMG, asked me if I'd go back to India. I hadn't actually been contemplating that at all. In fact, in the middle of December, somebody had placed a bet that had essentially joked that, oh, maybe now you'll go back to India, but it wasn't the plan. But around the middle of December 2016, I was asked if I would do this. Practically a month and a half later, I was in the saddle at KPMG India. So today what I'm going to tell you is based on what I've seen in the last 15 months. Before I went to India, for 3 years I served in the Obama administration, where I had a global role. I was the Director General of the US and Foreign Commercial Service, which means all the people who deal with economic engagement and commerce in all the US embassies around the world, like the Minister for Commercial in every embassy. So I had people in 78 countries, had a really good view of what was happening around the world. And early in that period, I decided I would focus on the areas where we had the greatest upside for US engagement and exports. My particular interest was in exports, increasing US exports. The 3 areas that I picked were 1, India, 2, ASEAN, and 3, Sub-Saharan Africa. So so I had been watching India, I had been personally very engaged with India. I remember in 2014, Prime Minister Modi got elected. And when he got elected, it was an interesting point in US-India relations because many of you remember that Modi had not been given a visa previously, and people were wondering, what's going to happen to the relationship? Is it going to be friendly, not friendly? But as soon as he got elected, President Obama called him, congratulated him, and invited him to the United States. And when the president invites you, you know that the visa problem doesn't exist any longer. So that was the starting point of a new relationship. I think on both sides, we felt that this was a time to reset the relationship. And I was very happy to be a very key part of the re-energizing of the economic relationship between India and the US. So having been fairly closely involved with what's happening in India from my perch on Constitution Avenue in Washington, D.C., when the opportunity came to go to India, it was almost a no-brainer. I actually set a lot of things aside to say, okay, I'll go do it. What I'd like to tell you today is the story of what I'm seeing in India. It is a new India. It is not the India that many of us left. It is not even the India of just 10 years ago. And the place is just changing rapidly. So those of you who travel to India will know that 5 years ago, the way to get in the airports getting into India were by no means world class. Today, Mumbai or Delhi or Bangalore or Hyderabad, and even some others are really becoming top-notch airports. Just an example of infrastructure being built, making it easy to go in and out to do business in India. Similarly, the highways are expanding nicely. There are great new highways being built, and many of them being funded through very innovative programs. So there's a lot of new energy in the entire transportation sector. Similarly, in the urbanization sector, smart cities, 100 smart cities are being built. When you go to cities, I was recently in Chandigarh. In my job, I go to many, many places in India. And you go to these places, even the secondary cities, whether it's a Chandigarh or a Cochin or a Jaipur, you can see the energy in those places. So my first message, it's a new India. Second, when you think about India, you've got to remember that India's GDP today is about $2.5 trillion in real, that's not PPP in real terms. So that's the same as the UK. We think of the UK as a big economy. France is the same, about 2.5 trillion. So India's economy today in real terms is the same as the UK and France. And if you look at purchasing power parity, I would argue that maybe 3 times bigger. So India is an economic force. So while everybody's been sitting here in Silicon Valley, you may not realize what's happening back in India. The economic topography of the world is changing, and India is one of the drivers of that change. So I've been fortunate in my role in KPMG to work in a number of these areas. So we work with the government, the center and the states. We work with the top Indian companies, the top global companies. In fact, almost all of them were in India. But very importantly, we work with a lot of startups, e-commerce startups, internet startups, non-tech startups. I would argue that we have the largest startup and e-commerce practice, among all the consulting firms in India. Since 2009, we've served, well over 100 ventures. We work across the ecosystem. We work with regulators. We work with the funds that invest. We work with marketplaces. We work with the startups themselves. We worked with large companies, and we published reports jointly with Google and Facebook, so that's public knowledge. So the large internet companies. We work with small businesses that provide support to internet companies like analytics companies, logistics companies, cataloging, packaging companies. So it's a wide variety of business that we see. So we now work with the government and with the regulatory bodies across various initiatives. In the startup space, it's very clear that they're all committed to enhancing the focus on the sector, whether it's a regulatory body or the government. They want to see more startups, more e-commerce. And this is true at the center and the states. And one of the highlights is the fact that the government of India launched a program called Startup India. And in fact, I think Venk and a few other people from Silicon Valley were at that launch event, I think a couple of years ago. Ram, you were there, I guess. So you guys have been actually helping the government of India think through. And it's also very nice to see that the center and the states come to TiEcon. I saw Odisha was here, and I saw people from other states here. So this is all a symptom of the great interest there is in India in startups, in venturing forward. So what's the fundamental thing that a business needs? I mean, clearly it's demand. If there's demand, there will be business. And in India, there's plenty of demand. Consumer spending is constantly rising. The expenditures on infrastructure is really significant, and infrastructure spending has a tremendous multiplier effect. So when I talk to CEOs and major business leaders, they tell me that they are looking at growing their businesses between 25, 30, and 40% year over year. So, in India, the fiscal year ends on March 31st. As the CEO, I finished my first fiscal year this March, and we're building our budget for next year. So I thought, let me ask other CEOs, what are they planning in terms of growth? So I called a bunch of my friends, and one of them told me every business unit in his company wanted to grow 40%. And he was saying, hold it, the wheels will come off. I'd be happy with 30%. But that is the sense of the opportunity in India. Tremendous opportunity. I haven't seen, since the dot-com days, I have not seen an opportunity-rich environment like in India. I don't know if anybody remembers dot-com days. It was actually pretty good because everybody wanted to do things. People were willing to take risks, make things happen. Today, India feels like the energy that you saw in the dot-com days here in Silicon Valley, that's the energy that you see today in India. And therefore, that's why it's a critical fact that India is the fastest growing large economy in the world. You can actually feel it. In my view, India has at least 2 or 3 decades of fast growth ahead of it. So it's not just a one-year thing. 1 year it might grow a little bit slower. Last year about 7%, this year 7.5%, but you've got to look forward and say it's going to have continuous steady growth for several decades to come. This is what happened in China. I mean, China grew double digits for 20 years. Why would India not be the same? I think it will be the same. It will grow at a pretty fast pace for the next 10, 20 years. So therefore, I think that, in fact, after Silicon Valley, India is the place to be. So those of you who want to build new businesses, want to venture forth, think about India. It's definitely a place to be. If you're investors, you should definitely be thinking about India. Last year, India added 1,000 startups, 1,000 startups, which makes it one of the largest places for startups. There are about 10 unicorns, and these are Flipkart, Ola, Paytm, names that you may have heard about. You may have heard about the fact that Flipkart is, there's a competition to buy Flipkart and Walmart and Alphabet. It looks like from public reports, and I can't talk about private stuff, but public reports tell you that they're closing in at a very, very interesting valuation. So and along with that, there are a number of other unicorns, Zomato, Quicker, Snapdeal. In the solar energy business, there's Renew Power. So a wide variety of unicorns and a number of what they call soonicorns, people who will soon become companies that will soon become unicorns. Many venture investors have told me that after Silicon Valley, India is the best place to see deal flow and investment opportunities, better than Boston, better than New York. So if you're not here, that's a place to look at. And the ecosystem supporting entrepreneurship in India is changing at a fairly fast pace, whether it's incubators, accelerators, VC funds, PE funds, angel investors, corporate funds, corporations, and so forth. So that's a big part of what you should remember. The kinds of startups are changing, more and more B2B startups. 40% of startups are now B2B. You should also remember that the ease of doing business in India is an area that the governments, both at the center and the state, have a very big focus on. So in 2013 or so, 2014, India was ranked 148 or something in the World Bank rating. It's moved up to 100. The Prime Minister Modi has talked about being in the top 50 in the next 2 or 3 years. So there's very concerted effort to improve the use of doing business. That is not to say that it translates automatically to ground level reality, but there is a lot of movement. I was in Davos earlier this year, and the Prime Minister had hosted a dinner for a few CEOs, and I talked to a number of the US CEOs who were there. And these are people, whether it's Cisco or IBM or Microsoft, who've been working in India for several years. And they were all quite clear that when you look at over the period they've traversed, they can definitely see improvement in the business climate in India. So that the trend is definitely positive, and I heard this from some of the top CEOs in the world. Some of the features I would think about in the India environment is the amount of talent. There's a lot of talent in India. The talent may be a bit raw. They may need to get some help, may need a bit of polishing, but the talent exists. There's talent, there's motivation, there's people who want to do things. More and more people want to be entrepreneurial rather than join a big company. I think that the narrative is changing hugely. So it's no longer that parents are looking to their kids to go join some big stable company. It's fine for kids to say, you know what, I want to do something different. Why? Because there's such demand for talent. There isn't any job insecurity. If you don't like a job, you can get another one. Finding talent, it's a place where there's a lot of demand for talent, and people who are talented can find lots of opportunities. Second, I would say is a big trend is a large pool of digital consumers. You've heard of Reliance Jio, which provides tremendous bandwidth at very cheap prices. In fact, no cost for voice, and you only pay for data, which is a kind of an out-of-the-box way of looking at that market. So there are many, many reasons why internet commerce and digital purchasing is increasing. Third, consumerism. There's a tremendous appetite to buy more, to consume more. The middle class is rising, and as they rise, they want to have the good things of life. And you'll be amazed at what a consumerist society India is. I sometimes feel chintzy when I see the way people spend money. But that is India today. And I also already mentioned the ecosystem that's being developed. In terms of investors, there have been substantial number of exits recently. $13 to $15 billion of investment have been made in 2017, and a lot of that's resulted in some good exits. Some of the top exits were a Qatar Foundation Endowment exited from Bharti Airtel, a very big transaction, open market transaction of $1.5 billion, which was 45% return in 4 years. Flipkart, the investors in Flipkart have had a couple of exits. So that's been good. Apex Partners had some good exits, but you're seeing some big, substantial exits happening in the Indian market. Let me touch on the demand picture. So I think the demand is going to be is going to be very much mobile-centric. Everybody now, most people have mobile phones, smartphones, or other phones that they use for commerce. So that's going to be an important part of the picture. What you need to remember is that of the 450 million internet users in India, 250 million are Indian language users who prefer or who would like to use Indian languages or cannot actually use English. This group of consumers will drive the next wave of growth. This is a huge opportunity for internet businesses. Today, there are 75 to 100 million online shoppers, and that number will grow significantly over the next several years. Digital wallets are very popular. You're seeing a lot of convergence between retailers and e-tailers, assisted commerce, on which I will talk a bit more later. But overall, there are a number of features of the e-commerce related scene that are extremely encouraging. One interesting fact about India's growth is that the apps, when you look at the apps that are downloaded, Share It and UC Browser are two apps that you probably don't hear about here that are about as popular as WhatsApp. These are apps coming from China, as it turns out, but Share It allows you to share files very quickly over pretty low bandwidth. So Villager can use Share It to transfer files very easily, and it's catching on a lot. So the growth of these new applications is actually spreading the demand base that businesses can reach. So in terms of overall demand, I mentioned the 450 million internet users, about 300 million smartphone users, Indian language users about 250 million or so. The English-speaking users 175 million, but a high-consuming group. The online shoppers are only 7.5%. But if you look at the growth rate, you can see that the online growth rate is 42%. The organized retail is 26% compared to the base market of 9.7%. So we're seeing a lot of growth in the e-commerce areas. So let me touch on a few key trends affecting the system. One key trend is assisted commerce. E-commerce is being morphed in India to meet India's unique needs. A tremendous convergence, for example, between telecom and e-commerce and retail. So one of the areas of convergence is what they call assisted commerce, which allows you to facilitate online commerce. For example, there's a company called ShopX that Nandan Nilekani is one of the investors. ShopX essentially connects the kirana wala, the small store, all the way to a huge supply chain of various products that can be sold at retail. So you can actually go online, buy what you want, and go pick it up at the kirana wala. So e-tailing is not there competing with retailing. It's actually finding a way to collaborate with e-tailing. And I've been in several meetings with some of the top companies in India in the telecom space where they really want to make that kirana supply chain work. You don't hear about that here in the US, but this is an area that is really strong. Then think about the Aadhaar centers. The unique identity scheme where 1.1 billion Indians have a unique identity card. That's like a historical first. Now, the Aadhaar card is a foundation of a number of foundation of a stack which allows you to do a tremendous number of transactions. So there are 50,000 Aadhaar centers which are digitally enabled. 100,000 airline flight booking counters via .com. Train ticketing is through the Railway Corporation. About 7 million tickets are booked every month. So these are all examples of assisted commerce. And then there are various brands that are becoming just online only or online first brands. So the online scenario is changing very nicely. SMEs are getting a big boost because of the online trend. For example, there's a place called Tirupur near Coimbatore which is a textile place. I mean, it is amazing the kinds of products that they're making there and selling globally through e-commerce. You keep hearing success stories. I heard about an aggregator of ethnic wear in Surat suddenly becoming a $25 million company, selling only through marketplaces. And then you've heard about Ola and Oyo and these applications which are similar to Airbnb and similar to Uber. These are the Indian versions of, or Indian approximates of those shared economy applications. So I'd say a lot is happening in the startup ecosystem. Now, we're seeing startups focusing on clusters, and this happened here as well. But you have startups focusing on senior citizens, on Indian language users, on bank employees, people who are looking for new adopters. So just a whole variety of segmentation is going on in the space, and startups are segmenting them and trying to target each of these customer clusters. Seniority.com is a site from a large company called RPG that targets senior citizens. Now, it's interesting that this entrepreneurship that you're seeing is not only from individual entrepreneurs. Many of the large companies are also playing the entrepreneurial game. They organize like entrepreneurship units to attack these markets. So let me touch on a few examples of some of the sectors. Online education. There's an app called Byju's, a company called Byju's, that's been very successful in online education. It's like the Khan Academy of India, except that it's it's a paid model. But he's done really well. He's growing it now beyond India to other countries, but provides great educational support for K to 12. It is. They have an innovative approach. They provide a loaded tablet with all the courseware, so the student can get a tablet that has a lot of stuff preloaded before they start using the Byju applications. And they're moving beyond the tier 1 cities to a number of other places in India. Then there's internet gaming, which is another area where we're seeing a fair amount. There are 300 million gamers in India, and a number of businesses are popping up in that space. FinTech, Paytm, payment system, hugely successful. There's an Tencent is an investor, and Paytm actually got a boost when demonetization happened in India, in November 2016, when various denominations of rupee notes were suddenly demonetized. People were forced to move to digital cash. So just the point here is that just a lot of different applications coming up. A lot of this is founded, the foundation is the Aadhaar unique identity card and the UPI interface, the Universal Payments Interface that the government has set up. In fact, there's an application called BEAM from the National Payment Corporation of India, which is extremely successful. I can tell you that's so easy to get set up on online payments in India. When I went there, when I opened a bank account in a bank, and they set me up on an application called PhonePe, PhonePe, and it's easy for me just to pay on the PhonePe application. So it's just incredible. It's incredible to see how easy it is now to do business using using the internet. There are a number of fintech companies beyond Paytm. There's Rubik, Bank Bazaar, LoanTap. I mean, it's just amazing how many different new ventures there are. There are also lots of ventures in logistics. There's a firm called Delivery that I know that Narayan Gupta, who many of you know, has invested in. So it's interesting to see at the back end, there are companies that you don't see that are extremely successful. I thought I'll show you a picture of some of the interesting companies. Many of you may know about Paperboat, which is the one here. Anybody who flies Indigo, if you come to India and fly Indigo, they serve you Paperboat. So Paperboat is kind of a juice company or a mixed juice company that seems to be doing really well. They have an investment from Tata Global Beverages. There's an idli company called ID.com or something, idli and dosa batter. Simple idea, everybody eats idlis and dosas, and this thing is very popular. So just to show you that there's just a variety of new businesses, new brands being built up. There's a beer company, Bira, which is now served everywhere, from the fancy clubs to the local restaurants. So entrepreneurship is not just internet and e-commerce, it's a whole variety of things, from beer to dosas to fashion. So I mentioned that there is Startup India, there's a fair amount of government support for startups. This is true at the center and at the states. There are states like Andhra Pradesh, where Chandrababu Naidu is very, very keen on promoting startups. Gujarat is not far behind. Telangana is neck and neck with Andhra Pradesh. Kerala is very focused now. So it's really encouraging to see how many states are looking at promoting entrepreneurship. From the center, they've eased various tax policies to help startups. The Startup India program is aimed at providing some startup funding. So they've created a corpus of some money that can be used over 4 years. They've made policies to make self-certification in order to reduce the compliance burden. So really just a whole variety of ways in which, through tax policy, through funding, through helping incubation, through making it easier for startups to register, to patent their intellectual property. Through all these ways, the government is really moving very rapidly to make things easier for startups. Now, there's a lot of, along with all these good things, there's also a number of challenges. I think finding and retaining talent is an important one. There's such a demand for talent that retention is not easy. I see that in my business. We have, KPMG has 20,000 people in India, and the turnover is such that we're probably hiring 4,000 people a year just to replace the people we have. So that's a big job. So retaining talent is an important element. Like everywhere, there are quite a few Me Too firms, so not every firm is going to succeed. Customer acquisition, you've got to be really smart about how you can manage your customer acquisition costs. But I think one big challenge is the lack of mentorship. We just need to find a lot more mentors in India. And I can tell you this is true not just in the startup scene, in general, seasoned business leaders who can help others, we're just short of. Why? Because the country's economy has grown at such a fast pace. People have been catapulted into positions that would not otherwise happen. And so they don't have the experience necessarily to manage the complexities of the organizations that they end up leading. So we do need to see a lot more mentorship in India at every level. So I'd say the road ahead is positive. We're seeing, I mentioned the shift towards the B2B space, which is good. There's a lot of upside potential. Consumption story will continue. We'll see a lot of growth in the tier two towns, which are great places for people to live. And now with great air connectivity, you can live in Ahmedabad and be in Bombay whenever you want to be and go back. So a number of these tier 2 cities that I think will expand. I think the Indian frugal attitude still continues to play, so we will see more and more frugal innovation. The challenge is going to be how will startups challenge existing business models. I showed you some examples of how that's happening in the e-commerce space, like connecting the kirana to the supply chain. So these are some of the very interesting areas that we see opportunities. So at this point, that's the story. That's kind of a quick story of what's happening in India in the startup scene. And I'd love to take any questions on the startup scene or on India in general, because I went to India after 40 years here, so I might have some perspectives I can share with you. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Arunji. It was great presentation. I'm Dr. Kailash Gupta. I'm a social entrepreneur with a startup, the International Emergency Management Society, which is a professional body. And we want to make disaster management a movement, everybody's business. and we have done some work, but we are challenged with, in India, poorest of the poor, who are more suffer from disasters, they look for where is the next meal will come. So how do I make, this organization, this work sustainable? It's a social impact, and we are doing non-profit, and I'm a trustee of the society. So I need guidance from KPMG and people like that. Thank you.
No, I'd be happy to start.
I'm going tomorrow to Jaipur. I live in Jaipur city, okay. And which is growth. And I'm incidentally contact person for 100 resilient cities of Jaipur city. We have worked for 4 years to persuade mayors and others who were not willing to prepare application or submit application, and it has been selected. And for 100 smart city, the government of India and Rajasthan paid 25 lakh to a consultant, McDonald, and we have worked proactively, pro bono for 4 years, and still they are not willing to move ahead. I have to, shake them and sometimes go to the chief secretary to push things. Thank you.
I think what you're doing is really important. I think it's of importance to a lot of states. I know that, for example, in Andhra, after that big cyclone, there's been lots of plans in Vizag to address the whole issue of recovery from a disaster. So, we'll be happy to connect you with people, but frankly, for Andhra, we've got Raju Indukuri. I don't know if you know him. He knows everybody here. You should talk to Raju about Andhra. You should talk to Naren Bakshi about Rajasthan. There are people here who are actually very active in those states. But beyond that, I'd be happy to connect with you. Yes, please.
Good morning. I think it was a wonderful presentation that you gave this morning. Thank you so much. My name is Nimit Rawati. I'm one of the senior director here in artificial intelligence-based company called 247.ai. I have a question for you. I think I saw your presentation. You have said there are a lot of white spaces to be explored by entrepreneurs and also mentorship, right? So what, according to you, are those white spaces which are unexplored with the ecosystem in India? And how, with the mentorship in terms of artificial intelligence, machine learning that we see here in Bay Area can influence those white spaces that you get to see over there?
Well, in a country like India, there are plenty of white spaces, plenty. But just for example, the neglected sectors like agriculture is a highly neglected sector. And farmers have issues of knowing about predicting crop yields, getting the right pricing. Education is another area that really has a lot of need. So there are many, many huge white spaces in India where there are really crying needs. So anyone who can come up with models to meet those demands can build good businesses.
Mr. Kumar, wonderful presentation. I came to Silicon Valley in '99 with my son who was 9 months old. Aman, can you stand up?
Hi, Aman.
He's a TiE youth today, second generation. My wife and I had been TiE charter member for years. I was inspired by C.K. Prahlad, and he said, what do you do in Silicon Valley? Set up PMOs for all these successful companies. India needs you more than anybody else because implementation is challenge. I went with this T-Bomber. They had a product called Microsoft Project. I was implementing. As I was moving around, I realized there was no culture of project management. So I set up PMI in India and trained 100,000 people with project management. 2,500 people are all IAS and IPS officers who are changing the face of the country. Picked my bag, moved my family to India, lived there for 15 years. And I was mesmerized by the opportunities India really had. And I witnessed every single thing which you have shown me. Baizu platform was created by myself, by the way. I brought Baizu with Samsung smartphone and tablet. Not only Baizu, Fitzy, Pearson, British Council, entire content was on this smartphone and tablets. So India has arrived for sure. It's not that it's arriving because I witnessed that myself. So question is, while I saw opportunities 15 years back, my son, he's packing his bag after this conference, going to India because that's the opportunity he sees. So I wanted to just validate, it's not my question, I just wanted to provide a validation that India has arrived. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for that. In fact, there's a publication that we at KPMG have put out. It's called India Soars Higher. So actually you can go on Google and download it. It gives you a pretty good snapshot of all the key parameters relating to the Indian economy.